as fleeting as ocean waves, changing form, ebbing away without leaving a trace. But deeds which deserve remembering, these leave an inspiring trail to follow, which neither wind nor wave can erase. A descendant of immigrants settled here in Minnesota. Here stood a grove of oaks. The man sought trees, and yet saw something more. Here stood a warehouse for potatoes, and in this landlocked town, the man fashioned the oaks into a ship whose greatest cargo was a dream. Like all of us, this man touched many lives in many ways, but this is what we will remember him for: a dream, a ship, a tale to tell. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings raided and plundered the far-flung coasts of Europe, trading in slaves and silver, and bringing terror to the young nation-states of the South. This fierce northern people settled far and wide, even as far as Newfoundland on the coast of North America. But deteriorating climate, remoteness, and hostile natives soon drove them away from the New World. In 1867, famine sparked a rise in Swedish emigration. The following year, on board a ship bound for North America, immigrants Olaf and Britta Asp gave birth to a son, Charles Otto. The family settled in Wisconsin and became American. Later, they moved to Minnesota. And sometimes they dreamed of returning to the land of their forefathers. One son of the shipborne immigrant, Robert Asp, grew up to become a teacher and student counselor, and in the spring of 1971, this active man viewed the upcoming summer break with restlessness.
Well, Bob and Bjarne, his younger brother, was sitting discussing Norwegian history one night, and one of them said, "Wouldn't it be fun to build a Viking ship and sail it to Norway?" Well, Bob was helping a fellow teacher remodel his home. So the next day, when he was up on the roof, the scaffolding broke. He fell the story in half, breaking 10 ribs, a shoulder blade, and he punctured a lung. So he was laid up in the hospital for quite a long time, and Bjarne brought him these books on the Vikings, and that's where the dream began.
Bob Asp planned to model his ship upon a 9th century Viking ship discovered in 1880 in Gokstad, Norway. In 1893, a replica of the Gokstad ship was sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. And in 1971, this replica stood outside a Chicago museum. Visiting Chicago, Asp found a vessel 76.5 feet long, weighing 20 tons. Asp faced a monumental task, what is believed to have taken 100 skilled Vikings a year to build. Bob Asp intended to accomplish in 2 years, single-handedly. In the spring of 1972, Asp began to gather his raw materials, primarily oak trees. Milling began on the 4th of July. When 1973 rolled around, Asp began to search for a space large enough to house his dream. He found his shipyard in Hawley, Minnesota, at this abandoned potato warehouse. And during the following summer, Asp began to lay the 76-foot laminated keel, 1,100 miles from the ocean and 200 miles from Lake Superior, his projected launching place.
Being that I don't work at my regular job during the summer, I'm a school counselor in Moorhead, and then I have 3 months every year to work at it. We've gone up to the water line. We're at the point where we're going to put the ribs in now, and then we'll finish everything below the deck and below. No doubt in my mind that we're going to sail it.
The project proceeded at a leisurely pace, but in 1974, Bob Asp discovered he had a serious illness.
After Bob was diagnosed as having leukemia, he was sitting down in the basement of the old potato warehouse one day with his head in his hands, and he said that no one would blame him if he didn't continue the project. But he didn't want to sit in a chair and wait to die. So he said he was going to continue. And at that time, I told him that he should take it as far as he could, and that we would finish it for him if need be.
My father had more than a little of the stubborn Norwegian in him, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him from building that ship, whether it was delays in the construction, the amount of time it took, his work, leukemia, or anything else.
Oh, this is a great day. It's been an exciting day. It's something that I've been looking forward to a long time, and it's good to see it out there. You know, I mean, it's hard to express in words like that. I think it's bigger than words. Just look at it and really don't believe it. You know?
Hannah Foldo, mother of Rose Asp, was given the honor of christening the ship, for the great oaken vessel now had a name: Hjemkomst, homecoming.
We had to move the ship from Hawley to Duluth, and Bob had worked hard all day long preparing the ship for its journey. He drove all night long. He was so excited about finally getting the ship for his launching.
It had taken Bob Asp 9 hard years, but now, at last, the dream was truly afloat.
Oh, this is good. This is great. I'm not a bit afraid of it. I'm convinced. It's good.
On her maiden cruise, the ship's captain stood proudly at her helm. With him on the deck stood some of the many friends and family whose encouragement and hard work allowed the Hjemkomst to sail out of the dreams of her creator and into reality. In December of 1980, she lay in winter storage in nearby Knife River. But the homecoming of Robert Asp was not to be. Shortly after Christmas of 1980, Bob Asp succumbed at last to his illness.
When my father contracted leukemia, the doctors gave him at most a few years to live. But he never faltered in his determination to complete his dream, and that determination inspired the rest of us to carry through after he died.
The Hjemkomst began that next summer to pit its textbook rigging against the realities of Lake Superior.
After launching the boat, we took her out for some sea trials. We discovered that we had some problems in handling the boat. Number one, I suppose it would be the inexperience with handling a square rig. The rudder didn't seem to steer the boat very well. We knew we had a lot of problems we had to solve.
The crew discovered that Norwegians still sail today in smaller versions of the Viking boats called femberings. And that discovery led to what turned out to be the key to solving many of the ship's problems.
One of the early concerns that we had with the crossing to Norway was finding an experienced skipper. We knew that we needed somebody with experience with square rigs and ocean crossing.
Eric Rudstrom, Norwegian, 62 years old. He had already made 4 trips between Norway and Iceland in 40-foot square-rigged femberings. Rudstrom and Tom Asp exchanged correspondence over the course of several weeks, and the experienced skipper supplied the crew with some suggestions. Finally, Rudstrom flew over from Norway to take a look at the Hjemkomst.
The first time Eric was out sailing on the boat with us up in Knife River, and Eric was on the rudder, and I went back and talked to Eric and asked him at that time if he'd want to skipper the ship to Norway. And he kind of said with a grin on his face, he said, yeah, I think that'll be the good thing to do. And our relationship started from there.
Rudstrom was impressed with the ship, but he was also aware of its shortcomings. He immediately put his experience to work. He added 8 tons of ballast to improve stability in the high seas. He also demonstrated a more effective rudder design and extended the depth of the keel. Most importantly, he totally redesigned the ship from the deck up. A new mast, new sails, and all new rigging.
During the winter of 1980, 1981, we'd received about 400 or 500 inquiries of people wanting to become crew members. And when we responded to those inquiries, we told the people that the best way to become a crew member was to show up in Knife River and work with us in the ship for the 3 months, and at the end of the 3 months would tell them whether or not they could join the voyage to Norway.
In the end, 12 were selected. In addition to Rudstrom, the final crew included 4 of Bob Asp's children: Roger, 31 years old; Doug, 32; Tom, age 24, and the only woman crew member, Debbie Asp, 19. Mark Hildy, 24, was designated first mate and later cook. In addition, there were Paul Hess, 31, ship's navigator; Jeff Solem, 19, radio operator; Dennis Morkan, 29, bosun; and crew members Myron Anderson, 25, Lynn Halmrast, 31, and Norwegian Bjorn Holtet, age 24.
Well, after Eric left that fall, before we sailed, he outlined a whole host of jobs that needed to be taken care of, including finishing up the rigging, the mast, the new yard. Lots of rope work needed to be taken care of.
As part of the process of redesigning the boat, my brothers Doug, Tom, Debbie, myself, and Mark Hildy flew over to Norway to sail a Fembering, rigged pretty much the same as the Hjemkomst was going to be. The Fembering had turned out to be a beautiful handling boat, and the Hjemkomst ended up being essentially the same.
The crew members became more thoroughly acquainted with Eric Rudstrom and some of his Norwegian sailing terminology. The crew also met a 22-year-old Norwegian youth named Vegard Heide, whose sailing skills made an immediate impression on the Americans. In the spring, he became the 13th and final addition to the ship's crew. At last, the day arrived. The years of preparation lay behind them. The crew raised their new sail and headed out into Lake Superior. The Hjemkomst was on its way to Norway. The first leg of their journey encompassed 3 of the Great Lakes, the Erie Canal and the Hudson River, 1,300 miles which would take them to New York City, their jump-off point for the Atlantic crossing. From the start, Lake Superior lived up to its reputation as a punishing experience. It was the second week of May. The winter's ice had vanished from the lake only 2 or 3 weeks before.
The crossing of Lake Superior was actually the toughest part of the trip. It was cold, rainy, the water temperature was 35 degrees, we were wet all the time, the winds hit us head on, and we were on the lake for a week.
The ship crossed Lake Huron in near record time and then paused at Detroit. After crossing Lake Erie during 2 days of thunder showers, the Hjemkomst reached Buffalo, New York. Here they encountered yet another of the many enthusiastic crowds who tossed money on board or food, or who turned out merely to extend their best wishes for a successful voyage. On Memorial Day, the crew broke out its oars for Buffalo's West Side Rowing Club, who took the ship the 8 miles up the Niagara River to Tonawanda. There, the ship entered the New York State barge canal system. This modern-day descendant of the Erie Canal stretches nearly 300 miles from Buffalo in the west to Albany in the east. The Hjemkomst passed through a total of 36 locks, which lower the level of the canal to compensate as the surrounding terrain gradually descends to sea level. At Albany, the crew raised the mast and began their descent of the Hudson River, reaching New York City the morning of June 6, 1982. The ship docked at the southeastern tip of Manhattan, just south of the Brooklyn Bridge. But their arrival had not been entirely without mishap. They had suffered some minor damage on the river when they struck a heavy steel piling. Then Roger Asp suffered serious injury to his arm when a diesel cook stove exploded into flames as he attempted to light it. A devastating ship's fire was narrowly averted. And then, on the eve of their departure for Norway, crew member Lynn Helmrast left the ship for good.
The risk for me, personally, is too intense, too great, when I consider that there's a 5-year-old boy waiting back in Moorhead for me to come home and watch him grow up and play baseball and all those good things. And so I'm going back.
The crew of 12 finally bid goodbye to the American shoreline. Ship and crew and Robert Asp's dream were about to be tested by the fierce North Atlantic Ocean.
As I waved goodbye to my kids, the crew, and the Hjemkomst, I felt assured that I would see them in Norway. But this was my final goodbye to Bob.
Ahead, Norway, 3,900 miles away.
We'd been out on the ocean for a few days when Jeff Solom, the radio operator, got word that we were going to hit a big tropical storm. We started preparing for that, battening things down, figuring out who was going to stand watch, and just getting ourselves a little bit prepared.
Early on the morning of June 18th, a forestay, one of the lines which braces the mast, broke. The ship dropped its sail, and crew members Dennis Morkan, Jeff Solom, and Vegard Heide spent the day making repairs. It was a tough, exhausting job, but crucial to ensuring that the mast would survive the coming storm.
As it was getting darker, the sea started giving off kind of this weird green glow that was reflected on this huge white sail. And it was eerie. It was really eerie out that night with the wind howling. Luckily, it was not a cold wind.
At one point, we had 5 guys hanging on the downhaul trying to pull down on the mainsail. And our feet were off the deck, and it wouldn't budge. It was a bad feeling because we knew it had to come down. If we didn't get it down, I don't know what would have happened. It would have been just too much force on the shrouds, the mast, the sail. Something would have had to give way.
The sail was on the verge of pulling us over at one point, and we had a very difficult time trying to drop the sail.
Finally, we figured out a way to kind of pull on the downhaul like a bow, and then let it slap back at the mast and pull up the slack on the bottom of the cleat, and we did finally get the mainsail down. A day or two later, the wind dropped down to about 35 knots, so the wind was no longer blowing the tops off the waves. We were sailing along under reef sail, and this one large crashing wave came in over the stern.
Well, I was at the helm, Vagar was behind me, and we knew that this wave was big. In fact, we had talked about getting the camera out, and that's why we have pictures of it. But when this wave hit, we started surfing down the wave. The rudder breaks, so we have no control. Luckily, we're heading down the wave at the right angle, and we hit the bottom, and the wave just jumped in the boat with us. We were filled with water.
That single freak wave cracked the garboard, which is the strake or plank next to the ship's keel. Though only 1/8 of an inch wide, the crack was a full 14 feet long. Water poured into the ship. Only 500 miles out of New York, the Hjemkomst already appeared in desperate straits. As they bailed and worked at reattaching the rudder, the crew thought about turning back to Newfoundland. But Rudstrom's experience told him that coming about and pounding back into the wind would cause too much stress on the ship and would take just as much time as continuing on to Norway. The Hjemkomst forged ahead.
In order to repair the crack in the boat, what we did was tore burlap bags into strips and hammered that down inside into the crack. And it still leaked a little. It really cut it off. But what that turned out being was one of my major jobs on the boat.
The Hjemkomst was to experience several more gales at sea, but the worst was behind them. Tom Asp's oral log reflects this calm after the storm.
We're pretty well recuperated from the weekend storm. Mark has been working on his new appointed position as the cook. Eric didn't like it when we didn't get 3 hot meals a day, so he pulled somebody off watch to full-time cooking.
The food was good. I had a lot of comments about that. Basically, it was soybeans that were flavored as beef or chicken, and navy beans. In fact, we had beans just about every meal. It's a good thing that we had the open boat.
After weeks at sea, even a 76-foot boat can seem small to a crew of 12. At times, music filled the silence. And on calm days, the crew joined the dolphins for a swim. The crew stood watch and slept. And finally, they scanned the charts and the horizon for land.
Well, we'd been out for the better part of a month without seeing any sign of land whatsoever. And the first thing we saw was Rockall, a chunk of rock sticking up out of the Atlantic a couple hundred miles northwest of Scotland. Wasn't much to look at, but at least at that point we knew that land was nearby.
You can't imagine how good it looks to see land after you've been seeing nothing but water for 5 weeks. You know, it's just really too bad that my father wasn't there to see that, because that's what he'd really worked for.
When we spotted land, it was a feeling of total exhilaration. You could smell the greenness in the air. It was a sweet smell, and it was accomplishing what you set out to do. Wanted to tell Bob, hey Bob, we did it.
Just seeing Norway and knowing that we had made it made for one of the better days of my life.
All the ships in the inner harbor were sounding their horns. The sound was deafening. We were rolling up to the Pier of Honor. It was a real humbling experience knowing that that was all for you.
minutes silence to the memory of Robert Asp.
It's an honored and traditional theme of American life that the unexceptional person, by their own efforts, becomes exceptional. Robert Asp was such a person. In the face of great odds, he crafted a dream, and a crew of exceptional men and women sailed it to its homecoming in the land of their ancestors.
You know, if you think positive thoughts, you're going to get positive results. I thoroughly believe that. And I think if you have faith, things are going to come out right. They will.
As the embodiment of a dream come true, the Hjemkomst is, as her creator said, too big for mere words. So as you gaze upon her, remember the heroic achievement of Robert Asp and his dauntless crew. And then remember your own dreams, and know that they too are not beyond your reach.